Episode 41, A Strange Proposition. While Luigi's revolutionary activities had previously consisted of a lot of fighting, it didn't take long for Luigi to discover that leading a revolution really involved lots and lots of paperwork. He had left Toad Town as soon as he had freed it to start his work on freeing Mushroom City, and after that he had been approached by Fire Flower, so he really hadn't had much opportunity at all to do much leading. Thankfully, Toadette was always on hand to help him when he needed it. Luigi was currently seated in Princess Peach's office, an elegantly decorated study with a mahogany desk facing a window and a small fireplace with 2 seats and a table in front of it. There were several bookshelves also in the office, with books mostly on political and historical subjects. The room had thankfully been untouched during the Koopa occupation, and the Toads had graciously cleaned out the cobwebs. Luigi was touched to see that Peach kept a small picture of him and Mario on her desk. He kept it there. It was nice to remember the past because it gave him motivation to return things to those happier days. Luigi went over the reports and birds chirped outside. The window faced east of the castle, and had a beautiful view of the Mushroom Plains. Unfortunately, Luigi had no time to enjoy the beautiful day. Without him, his revolution appeared to have handled quite well, he remarked as he read over a paper. More Koopa troop strongholds had been overthrown by the constantly growing resistance, including the castle on the coast of Doop Doop Dunes. That had been one of the Koopa troops' strongest garrisons despite its remote location relative to the rest of the kingdom, as it had been one of Bowser's castle. While many of Bowser's castles had been built close to the border for convenience's sake, when Bowser had discovered Peach's vacation home in Sunbeam Plains, he had built a castle in a volcanic crater not far from it. That had been the center of the adventure Luigi had had when he had met Mario's alternate counterpart, from the world where everything was made out of paper. Previously it had been too powerful to take, but the war had reduced its garrison to a small reserve, easily overcome. Also promising were the Resistance's new weapons. Luigi had gotten a chance to see one of the new Mushroom Kingdom battleships up close earlier in the day. It was a beautiful sight, with fresh white paint and a golden star-shaped prow. Turns out there were more than enough workers willing to remodel Koopa ships for the cause. So far, there were 40 of said ships in the Mushroom Fleet, but more were coming. While Luigi wasn't sure how many they'd be able to capture due to most of the Koopas off fighting in the war, he hoped they'd have enough to be able to meet invaders head-on if necessary. Luigi sighed and leaned back. The pink cushion felt comfortable on his stiff back. It was slow work, but things were coming along. This war had really been a blessing. The understaffed Koopa forts were falling one after another, and with Mushroom City fallen and Bowser Jr. occupied, they had no real sense of unity. It wouldn't be long until the kingdom was once again under the control of its own people. It was a satisfying thing to think about. Luigi smiled, gazing at the picture of his brother that sat on the desk. Mario would be proud of him. Just like he was proud of Cobal. Cobal's rescue of the heroes had saved them in Flame's attack, and it would likely earn them many more victories. There was one thing that troubled him, however. Cobal's story of their escape and their fight with the mysterious Skulls Fortescue. Cobal had been shocked to learn that Luigi had met Skulls. Luigi had not thought much of the gentlemanly clad Koopa in the barn near Koopa Central, but now it seemed like he was somebody to worry about. An old mercenary from the first Koopa War, Luigi mused, but obviously he hasn't done that kind of work for a while, or else I think Mario and I would have fought him before. That time at the bar. He was probably scoping me out. Luigi did not like that thought. With Koopa troop forces on every side, he did not have time to worry about this strange newcomer. After all, regardless of if the Neo Empire or the Bowser loyalists won the war, either side would turn their attention to recovering the Mushroom Kingdom once the throne was secure.
One step at a time,
Luigi told himself. General Flame's attack had undone some of the repairs that the people of Toad Town had done, but the ever-cheerful Toads were hard at work fixing the damage. The sounds of their hammers and saws rang through the air as Cobal and his father strolled down the streets, making up for all the time they had been apart. Cobal saw a young Toad climb the steps to her Toad house to be greeted by her smiling mother. The once dead town had returned to life.
"So, how was life as the champ, Dad?"
Cobal asked, as they walked down a street lined with shops. Most of the shops were up and running again now, and the item shop had a brand new sign promising fresh mushrooms and fire flowers. Gonzales laughed, smiling at his son.
"Well, I'll tell you one thing, kid, there was a whole lot stuff I had to deal with. For every hour I was in the ring there were 10 doing publicity stunts and interviews, and some of those guys got real nosy. When I met your mom, I kept my relationship with her secret so that she'd stay out of the spotlight. The fights, though,"
he grinned,
"those were what made it worth it."
Cobal nodded. He understood only too well the thrill of battle, leaping towards a foe and putting everything on the line to take him down.
"What was the big point of your career?"
Cobal asked.
"I mean, the Koopa Empire took down all the videos of you because you were connected to Mario, so you're like a ghost."
"Well," Gonzales continued, with a proud look on his face. Cobal could tell that he enjoyed talking about his fights.
"I'll never forget my first solo match against Rockhawk that earned me the belt, of course, but after I claimed the championship the fight that most stands out was that one against Lee the Dupli-Ghost." "Never heard of him before,"
Cobal commented.
"Yeah, he used to train right here in Toad Town,"
Gonzales replied.
"Had a decent career in the Glitz Pit, although I heard the Koopas got him years ago. Anyways, when he challenged me, at first things weren't that tough. But then he turned right into Mario himself. Yup, turns out the OG Great Gonzales fought him a while back and learned how to transform into him. That made the fight a bit tough, you can believe that all right, but hey, no knockoff Mario can match the real deal. I beat him, fair and square, although I was sweating near the end."
"Wow!" Cobal breathed.
"Wish I could have seen that."
Gonzales smirked.
"Well, maybe once we kick old Bowser out, those videos will be available for everyone,"
he said, glancing up at the sky. The sun was beginning to set, long shadows falling over the brightly colored roofs of the Toad houses.
"Those stories about Mario and the rest of us. We all deserve them. King Bowser can't take it away from us."
Cobal spent the rest of the day with his father. It was striking how similar they were to each other, the same blunt, down-to-earth attitude, the same sense of humor. They ate dinner together for the first time at the Roasted Shroom, and then washed it down with iced Chuck Cola. All while they were together, Cobal told his father stories of how he had helped Luigi free the Mushroom Kingdom, while Gonzales recounted the thrilling tales of his fights with Mario against the secret society of X-Nauts and the even more terrifying evil, the Shadow Queen. By the time Cobal returned to Toadbert's house to sleep, he felt incredible gratitude towards Luigi for helping make this happen. He had helped Luigi recover his confidence, but Luigi's fighting and leadership skills had led to him finding his father again. Cobal lay back on his bed and flicked the switch off on his mushroom-shaped light. He threw the covers over him and looked up at his ceiling. This room was the room of his childhood, but it was scarcely furnished. Most Mushroom Kingdom-made toys and TV had been banned when the Empire took over, so he hadn't been able to enjoy things that the children of the pre-Empire days had. Mario's influence had been so great that even completely fictional shows like Toad Force V had taken at least some inspiration from his heroics. As such, the Koopa administration had banned them all. But all of that was ending, Cobal reflected. Soon, both he and the people of the Mushroom Kingdom would enjoy a peaceful life. Cobal closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. Cobal drifted in a void, the stars and brightly colored nebulas swirling around him.
What? Cobal reflected, glancing around at the swirling cosmos. 1 minute he had been in bed, the next. Why do you struggle, Cobal the Yoshi?
Came a serene, female voice from above.
Huh?
Cobal replied, glancing upward. There was a beautiful woman descending down towards him, clad in a pale blue dress. Her light blonde hair was styled in a way that covered her left eye, and her face was as pale as marble. In her hands she clasped a star-tipped wand. Cobal did not recognize her.
Who are you?
He asked, his voice seeming to echo through the endless void of space. The woman hovered down until she was level with Cobal.
Does it matter?
She replied, in a voice devoid of emotion.
I am speaking to you, Cobal the Yoshi? Why are you working to overcome the Koopa Empire?
Cobal nearly laughed.
Why?
He said,
'Cause they've taken over the world, that's why. They've made life miserable for billions of people, they made it so I grew up without my parents, It is hopeless.
The woman interrupted him.
1,000 years ago, the world was nearly destroyed by the Shadow Queen. When your Luigi was born, the first Koopa War raged, and while he was a little child, the Shroops invaded, destroying countless innocent lives. When he was an adult he had countless clashes with not only Bowser, but with the likes of others. Cackletta and Fawful, the X-Nauts, Antasma. The list goes on and on.
She smiled coolly.
How many people will die so that you can overthrow this Koopa Empire, Cobal? Wouldn't it be better if they all simply destroyed themselves? The people wielding great magic, great physical strength, great minds to bring forth wonders. The people think they protect them, but in reality, it's they who have caused the problems. That's not true.
Cobal protested angrily. Who was this woman anyway? Who was she to tell him what to think?
Yeah, strong people can be a pain when they're evil, but they've done a lot of good, too. For every Shadow Queen and Bowser there's a Mario and Luigi. You can't lump the good in with the bad. Think of the hope that the Mario brothers have inspired. Even if all of the great people disappear, it won't solve all the problems. It'll just be more difficult to fix them.
The woman shook her head sadly.
You're young,
she said.
You haven't seen things the way I have. As this war reaches its end, you will understand.
Cobal was thrust awake. The rising sun was shining through his window, bathing him in gold. Nothing remained of the strange woman.
What? What was that all about?
Luigi liked to sleep in the same house that he had lived in for most of his life. It felt wrong sleeping in one of the finer apartments in Peach's castle. Even though he was technically leading the Mushroom Kingdom at the moment, he certainly wasn't the king or any other sort of political leader. He still had hope that they could find Princess Peach. Even if Peach was no longer alive, regardless of whether the people decided to crown a new ruler or move to another style of government, Luigi wouldn't be on top. All he wanted was to make sure all the people in the Mushroom Kingdom were free, and then live out a quiet life fixing people's sinks and toilets. Oh, and marry Princess Daisy too, although perhaps that was too much to ask. Luigi didn't even know if she was still alive. It was a crisp, beautiful morning as Luigi made his way down the dirt path that led from his house towards Toad Town, the bright sun shining down upon his head. Birds chirped in the trees that surrounded him, and in a thick clump of bushes to his right he heard the snore of a slumbering piranha plant. Once there had been a pipe that had led straight to Toad Town, but that had been blocked up so that invaders wouldn't have a way to sneak inside. It didn't really matter. It was only a short walk from the Mario Brothers' house to the town anyway. Once Luigi reached the edge of the small forest that surrounded his house, he leapt above the wall and into Toad Town. An old woman in the process of regrowing her garden gave him a friendly wave. Luigi smiled back, before walking down the street towards the town square. He could see Peach's castle rising above the colorful rounded roofs of the Toad houses, its red tiles catching the sun's light. Several of the Toads had repaired much of the damage the roof had sustained during Bowser's attack, leaving the palace looking as good as new. He smiled. Things were coming along well. In the town square, Luigi saw a mustached Toad taking measurements of the empty pedestal in the center of the fountain. Most likely he was making plans for the new Peach statue that was going to be placed there. Hovering on the edge of the city, Luigi could see one of the mushroom battleships, white with a sparkling star prow and a superstructure styled after Peach's castle itself. A sign of how far his resistance had come. Luigi turned and began to walk his way up towards the palace. Another long day of work awaited him. Well, it wasn't going to get finished all by itself.
Koopa alert! Koopa alert!
Luigi heard the screams of a frightened Toad behind him. As if he was dodging a stray fireball, Luigi turned abruptly to face Billy, whose face was white.
What's wrong?
Luigi asked, his heart beating. The Empire hadn't decided to send another invasion force, had they? Without the element of surprise, even with the old heroes and the battleships, they might not be able to win it.
There's a ship,
Billy said, tripping over his words.
Just one?
Luigi inquired. Billy nodded quickly.
Why? Yes. They're hovering outside the city. Their leader wants to talk to you.
Talk? Luigi asked. Did the Koopas want to parley? That was strange. The Koopa troop, he remembered, had never done anything but charge right into battle. Bowser and the Koopalings were too hot-headed and bloodthirsty to treat with their opponents. Still, if the Koopas wanted to offer him any sort of terms, it was his duty to hear them. Luigi walked out of the Toad Town gates alone, the city he had worked too hard to rebuild behind him. The battleship hovered in front with its propellers spinning, flying the flag of the Koopa Empire. Its design marked it as part of Bowser Jr.'s fleet. It hovered low enough for its extended boarding ramp to touch the ground. As Luigi walked closer, he saw that the delegation waiting for him consisted of a Koopa troll with an orange Bowser emblem on his helmet and two red-shelled Koopas. The Koopa troll had his hands clasped behind his back, and Luigi could not tell what was on his face due to his steel helmet. The sound of the battleship's engines filled the air.
Greetings,
the Koopa troll said crisply.
I am General Spiker, of High Command.
Luigi's eyes widened. High Command? This was pretty serious. What was one of the Koopa troop's top leaders doing here?
It's nice to meet you, General Spiker,
Luigi said, trying to disguise the nervousness in his voice.
Why are you here? If it's to threaten, I think that's not for me to discuss.
Spiker interrupted him.
That's a matter for His Highness.
Someone appeared at the top of the boarding ramp, and Luigi thought he saw a ghost. For a moment Luigi thought that Bowser himself had come to meet him. He certainly looked the same, although he wore a metal breastplate, which Luigi had never known the Koopa King to wear. But everything else— the muscular, yellow-scaled arms, the wild, bright red hair and the fiery eyes, the mouth full of sharp fangs.
Presenting His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince of the Koopa Empire, Bowser Jr.,
Spiker announced. Luigi fought to keep his composure. He couldn't afford to look weak here. But how could he not react? The childish-looking Koopa he knew as Bowser Jr. was gone. In his place was a splitting image of his father. Many expressions played over Bowser Jr.'s face as he looked Luigi over, towering above him just as his father had. Luigi remembered all the times he had stomped the Koopa Prince on the head.
"This is the first time we've seen each other since Mario died,"
Luigi reflected.
"You look surprisingly well for somebody who was supposed to be dead,"
Bowser Jr. said. To Luigi, he sounded bitter.
"Bowser Jr., you look big,"
Luigi replied, somewhat awkwardly. Bowser Jr. laughed hollowly.
"Let's get to the point, Green Statch. You want to know why I'm here?" "Yeah,"
Luigi replied, narrowing his eyes. He looked Bowser Jr. over. Clearly, he was more powerful than he had been as a child, but how much? Luigi had managed to defeat Roy back in Neon City, but it had pushed him to the limit. He didn't want to risk a fight like that so close to Toad Town.
"If you want Toad Town—"
Bowser Jr. waved his hand.
"Oh, you can keep Toad Town,"
he sighed. Luigi perked up.
"Wait. What?"
he said. Bowser Jr., offering some kind of peace terms? He really had matured.
"Yeah, what do we want with this place?"
Bowser Jr. said, looking over at Peach's castle resentfully.
"It's just a bunch of bad memories for us. Luigi, I'm going to make this clear. I want to cut a deal." "What kind?"
Luigi asked. He was keeping his ears open for the hint of a trap, but there were none yet. Bowser Jr. had never been one for deception, but perhaps he had learned some new skills over the years.
"You helped my father in the past, Luigi, when there was a bigger threat,"
Bowser Jr. said.
"Now, I want you to help me against my older brother. Ludwig managed to use underhand methods to destroy my fleet. Since Dad still refuses to join the fight, the Neo Empire now has us outnumbered. I'm trying to gather my remaining forces to put together a new fleet, but I need more troops. If you help me, Luigi, when I'm Emperor, I'll give the Mushroom Kingdom independence."
Luigi smelt a trap. The Koopa family had never been generous.
"Under what condition?"
Bowser Jr. shrugged.
"We'll keep the other sectors, of course. You'll be free to do what you want in the Mushroom Kingdom, so long as you don't try to affect us. We won't try to take you over, so long as you don't try to get rid of our territory. I know you hero types might consider that a loss, but as long as there's a chance of it still holding together, I'm not giving up world domination without a fight."
A free Mushroom Kingdom. It was a tantalizing offer, to be sure. But that also meant leaving the Bean Kingdom, Yoshi's Island, Sarasa Land, and all the other nations in the world firmly under the Emperor's iron fist. It was far from a perfect deal, and yet—
"I'm not accepting anything,"
Luigi said firmly, raising his head to look Bowser Jr. in the eye.
"But perhaps we can talk. You want us to help you fight Ludwig, right? I can't promise I'll give up trying to free everyone. But maybe there's another deal we can make." "Humph.
Bowser Jr. grunted.
This is going to take a while.
Luigi knew it would be difficult to decide anything with Bowser Jr. But he had to try. If he figured out a way to stop the Koopas from attacking them, then he could free the people from the overhanging threat of another attack. Besides, it was common knowledge that the Neo Empire's territories were far crueler than Bowser Jr. and his allies' territories. Defeating Ludwig was something that had to happen, if the people of the Mushroom World were finally going to be safe.
We better get talking, then,
he said.